It's a great privilege to be here at this hothouse debate on the future of garden designs. For my sins, I'm chairing this session, and I think it's fair to say it's a panel discussion, but we're hoping to have some interaction from yourselves about, things that are going on in the industry. I'm chairman of the APL, Association of Professional Landscapers, and I've been a landscaper for 30 years. I also run a company called Landform Design and Build. We are a design and build company based in Surrey. I employ 40 people working at the top end of domestic gardens. And that market is holding up very, very well. A lot of our association members are working in the smaller end of the sector and are finding that market is very, very tough indeed. So we're going to look at and talk about things that are affecting garden design. Public awareness, I think that's a really, really big issue. The influence of contractors doing design and their ability to do design. I actually am a director with Andrew Wilson of the London College of Garden Design, so we actually teach garden design as a profession as well. Builders, in general terms, doing garden design and public cutting out garden designers. The size of the UK garden is getting smaller. Modern houses with gardens are actually getting a lot smaller. Pressures on environmental issues. Do clients actually understand about ethical sourcing? Do they actually understand about carbon footprinting? Certainly clients are a lot more travelled and a lot more worldly and have got visions of what they want to do, but the route to finding a garden designer I don't think has really been that much improved in the 30 years that I've been involved. And it's kind of, people stumble across it and people don't know where to find garden design. And environmental challenges ahead, the cost of landfill, the cost of actually generating and doing gardens is getting more and more expensive. I think in my lifetime, skips will be £500 per go, and you won't be able to get rid of garden waste like you historically did. So I think there's an awful lot of challenges ahead of us. I'm joined by Andrew Wilson. Andrew Wilson is a landscape architect, but for the last 20 years he's been at the front of kind of domestic garden design. He's also principal of our college, so he's an educationalist and has taught garden design for some 20 so years. He's an RHS judge, he's an author, and as also a business partner as well. So we're going to talk about some of the trends and some of the issues, but it's going to be a long hour if we don't get any participation, and please feel free to throw in some grenades from the audience. And then we've got Mark Woods, who's head of sales for Bradstone domestic area, and Bradstone have been a big supporter of APL and supporting our awards and supporting basically design, and Mark certainly has sat in on some of the garden design awards and selection. So, I mean, that's really what we kind of, as the overview, and I'd like to kind of really kind of open up the debate and kick off with Andrew. Obviously this kind of scale of gardens, Andrew.
I kind of thought a lot about today and about what elements might crop up. And I actually ended up with about 15 points. So I think potentially from our point of view, there's no reason to think this is going to dry up. But what I've tried to do is kind of narrow those down to some of the sort of salient elements, really. The scale of gardens is potentially the most major element that's affecting my line of business, which is garden design. And currently, the size of the average garden in the UK is 90 square metres. And if that's the average, and we all know of larger gardens, then there must be some really tiny gardens, much smaller than that. Potentially, this has big impact on the way in which we design, and also on potentially how our clients and how those small garden owners might work with those gardens. So although overall spend on those gardens may be reduced, in terms of scale or size, the potential for quality to improve in terms of garden furnishings, lighting, paving materials, planting and so on is potentially much greater. And so that's a kind of split division, if you like, on that score. In terms of the technology, and I just sort of hinted at it in that sort of introduction, it's quite interesting that a year or two ago I talked to one of my younger students who's a 27-year-old, and I think there's this kind of split generationally between the people who own gardens, and younger generation garden owners tend not to talk about their gardens in gardening terms. They are potentially not the kind of people who would use garden centres. They would potentially use their gardens in a very different way. So they might just simply enjoy relaxing in their gardens with mates. They might want to take their technology outside. And with Wi-Fi these days, that's entirely possible. They want to have fun, explore technology. And we're in a sort of garden centre-based show here. I haven't really had a huge chance to look around, but I don't think of garden centres as supplying that kind of technology to that younger generation. And potentially that's an area for debate and discussion. Certainly as a garden designer, most people respond to me in terms of my planting skills, but potentially when I talk to those clients who are younger, they are not talking to me about plants. Everybody's talking these days about grow your own. Younger generation not talking about grow your own because they're using their gardens in completely different ways. And so I think that obviously has a sort of big impact on the way in which we garden. In terms of my own work, Mark mentioned that I'm a landscape architect, and potentially also he mentioned that contractors are starting to move much more into the design field, which also has an impact on the kind of work and the amount of work that I may be doing. But what I also perceive is that in landscape architectural terms, planting design is either not taught very well at college level, and is certainly not delivered very well in the public spaces that we use and that we see around us. And that potentially one of the things that may be changing as a trend for future garden designers is to be offering their services as a consultant to landscape architects, to be offering that planting design advice and that design approach, which appears to have been lost in most of our landscape programs. And I was up in Birmingham talking about this to landscape architects in May and thought that I was either going to get clapped and applauded or thrown out of the room. And in fact, it was clapped and applauded. So I think within landscape architectural circles as well, there is scope for garden designers to expand into that sort of more public sector, public space kind of work, which obviously has an impact on training that I need to provide to my students and the kind of work that potentially we're doing. So I could go on and on really, but I'm very aware that I've just sort of hogged the limelight for 5 minutes. But they are all areas that I'm very happy to sort of discuss further and to take questions on.
I think one of the big issues, as I see it, is that I mean, obviously, I think we are in a retail show, and Glee is a very successful buyer's marketplace for all retailers. But you know, there's this feeling that garden centres generally are going to change. You know, you're going to start getting these big players, people like Next and Marks and Spencer's coming in, but currently, you know, we were discussing, we came up in the car together and we were discussing actually what is the role of a garden centre, and do you go to garden centres? And I don't, and you don't, and the only time you go to a garden centre is to buy a Christmas tree or some decorations or some emergency feed for the lawn. But
I take my mum for a coffee.
Certainly, I mean, the feeling is on our side of the trade is that garden centres are missing a trick. in the sense of educational wise. And I know there's a new garden centre coming up in Scotland that's actually opening its doors to communal schools, teaching horticulture, teaching planting, teaching about design, and almost being like a community centre, not just a place where you go get a cup of coffee and a cream cake. But I definitely think we as APL are not represented on the retail side. Landscapers, professional landscapers are not. It seems very, very fragmented, and certainly from garden design. And I actually think the role of garden designers, most garden designers that I work with are very, very, very good horticulturists. They know the plants and they're very passionate. And I don't think they're being fully utilised either in schools or in retail and actually teaching. I think when I talk to a lot of young people, there's a complete fear. They look at garden media programs and they fog over. I think garden media programs just make it far too complicated and off-putting. And most young people now don't want to talk to a crusty old guy in an apron in some mouldy old hut with some books there. They want to have an app or an iPad or download and do the research themselves. I actually don't think garden centres address plant combinations very, very well. They'll just have plant of the month or plant of the week, and you don't actually have somebody explaining why things go together in the way they do. So I think, possibly the future of garden design at entry level. Obviously, you are slightly different, Andrew. You do very, very high-profile, big schemes, and people know where to find you. But if somebody with a modest budget, how do they find about garden design? And garden design as a industry, I don't really think has really taken off.
I think you're touching on a lot of points there, and one of them is how the garden design market actually splits. And I generally think of it in three levels. So you've got a sort of top end, a middle range, and a lower end. And top end, which happens to be the area that I kind of work with, in terms of our recessionary times, appears to have been affected very little by the recession, by financial straits that we all find ourselves in. Gardens are still being commissioned, money is still being spent. But just to link back to the garden centre element, they are not likely to be the people who would be looking to garden centres to find inspiration and information. Your middle layer has a sort of big range in terms of spend, and at the lower end of that range, I think people are struggling to actually see the reasons why they might be designing gardens, having their gardens designed. And then at the lower end, that seems to be the part of the market that is struggling the most. And potentially those clients would be the people who would say, I would turn to my garden centre for information. But when I look at the garden centres around me, I'm based in Surrey, there are plenty of gardens on that sort of London suburban edge, garden centres. I don't see good design advice being offered. I don't see good planting advice being offered. I don't personally see ranges of products that I would see as being commensurate with good design. And the reason that I'm saying that is not to be overtly critical of garden centres, but to say what is it that is being offered to the people in that sector of the marketplace? And I have a big question mark over that.
Mm. I mean, I think we hear about kind of garden centres diminishing all their plant stocks at winter, because obviously they're carrying the risk of winter damage and turning car parks into ice rings and things like that. They're almost becoming kind of visitor attraction places and not places to learn about plants or even buy plants.
Well, in some cases you might even go and not see any plants at all, or find it difficult to actually identify where that part of the selling or what many people would still think of as being the basis of a garden centre is actually happening. What we were talking about in the car on the way up is this was related to this sort of technology, and that in all aspects of our life, technology is actually sort of zipping forward and changing our lives. But if you said, how does that apply to the garden? It'd be very hard pushed to say how. And if I look at the way garden centres developed in the second half of the 20th century, phenomenal growth, but then in a way a sort of static levelling off. So if you said, how do I go to shop or peruse or look for that new innovative material and product, would a garden centre come up on that list? I'd say at the moment, probably not.
Maybe it might be worth just asking for some views on that.
Sorry, Norman.
Good afternoon, panel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Norman Hambrook, Hambrook Landscapes Limited from Southampton. The question I'd put to the panel is, why would garden centres want to promote landscapers or landscaping?
Well, I think it's a very good point, but it's got to be a commercial reciprocal link. I think it's interesting. There's a big garden centre, a very, very big garden centre near us, a household name garden centre, set up a landscape side as a supply service to their customers. And I don't know if I'm right, but I've heard that the pressure on retail was that it's moving towards this whole total service type thing, where it's kind of everything's done and felt and dressed, and so landscapers will be an incredible part of retail. Interesting, this company spent an awful lot of money building this fantastic and then folded it. Why? Because it's a specialist thing and it's too much grief. But I actually think, if you're a garden centre offering and selling this promotion, upselling all these fantastic products, you can't just let people just leave it. You need to help them install it, either by design through to installation.
Well, I think the list is also endless in terms of what a garden centre can offer in terms of an installer landscaper requirement, right from sub-base hard landscape right the way through planting into the sort of areas that we spoke about with garden furniture and propping out and setting out a project. So I do think that there's a huge opportunity there for the garden centre sector.
I think it's not just about landscaping. I think, we are obviously talking about design. I think everything is quite interesting. We do a lot of new house builds, and the show houses always sell quickest. Yeah. Why? Is because a lot of people lack vision, and when you get a show house that's dressed internally and externally, it sells. And I think what we'll see is a lot of not the bottom end, but the middle end doing all that, because people generally have got no time. Their time is very, very precious, actually. And so do actually people want to garden? No, not a great deal, actually. I mean, Andrew was quoting me some very interesting statistics on the way out. I don't know if you just want to mention that, Andrew.
I think the statistic, according to a recent European survey, is that on average, people have about 19 minutes a week to devote to their gardens.
Unless it's a hobby.
That's out of their sort of leisure time, if you like.
That's maintenance time almost.
That is any time for gardens. And obviously, as an average figure, that covers a whole range of people, some of whom maybe don't even have gardens or don't garden. But potentially, if you said, well, even for a hobby gardener who is using, let's say they work and they are using their leisure time partly to support that hobby, you're still only talking about 4.5 hours a week of serious gardening time. And anybody who potentially has more time than that to spend in the garden, you'd have to actually say, well, who are those people? Obviously, retired people would fit into that category, or people who kind of make it somehow their sort of life's mission to have a garden. But obviously, we live in a society that in which most people of working age work, and then have to divide their leisure time in some way between television. Television accounts for still one of the largest percentages of that sort of time. So you're kind of fighting for people's time. And I think one of the difficulties with us is that, especially in a forum like this, we're talking often, garden-interested people talking to garden-interested people, and we all get very passionate about it. But if you actually talk to a much wider field of people, the actual facts and figures are very different. And that's one of the reasons that I highlighted this issue about the younger, say, sub-35, sub-40, 35 kind of age group. They are kind of moving into house ownership without any particular vested interest in their garden. And potentially that is something for the whole market of any garden-related business or profession or industry to pay attention to.
Could I come in there and just
Sure.
say that basically with garden centres and landscaping, there's a conflict of interest because garden centres want people, the DIY market. And with landscaping, we can do it for you. And that means that basically you're taking away trade from the garden centre. And people that want to have it done for them, I don't think they would go and look in the garden centre personally.
But why does it have to be that way? You could say, okay, that might be the current split, but you could say that there is huge benefit. Designers tend to be innovators and to introduce new information, new ideas, new products. Why can't the garden centre take advantage of that?
I mean, if it's set up properly, then, you know, you could upsell to a client. You can, you know, with all the patio furniture and all the pots and accessorize it. And there's no reason why it couldn't work a lot better than it actually does. It's very, very fragmented. Some garden centres have got very, very good tie-ups with landscapers.
Yeah.
It's obviously for commercial gain as well.
Ourselves personally, I mean, we started off with a plant centre because plants were in great demand. Unfortunately, that has dropped off because the mix between hard and soft landscaping has gone from what was 75% soft landscaping and 25 hard. It's reversed itself. People want the hard landscaping, and most garden centres are not fitted up, you know, to deal with hard landscaping. You'll find you'll get builders merchants that would do that, not garden centres. Garden centres are more interested in seats on, or bums on seats rather, in a cafeteria, and then going out and looking at giftware, not really looking at landscape products.
Would anybody else have a view on that?
Dougal.
Yep.
Sorry, where was that?
Hi guys. There are a lot of garden centres that are just out-of-town shopping destinations, but there are a lot of retail nurseries where customers who really want to get some inspiration and some education do go. And that's going on all over the country in a big way. What I'd like to ask Mark Wood is, are you having to introduce new fashion colours and types of paving on a very regular basis that's maybe fired up by people seeing Mark's show gardens at Chelsea? Or are people very, they don't change with fashions as much as we would like to think they do?
An interesting question. In answer to your question, yes, we are constantly looking at trends and working very closely with a range of garden designers up and down the country, and factoring into that feedback that we get from places like Chelsea and Malvern Show this week that we're there with testing some new products. And yeah, we are finding that trends are demanding different shapes, colours and sizes, and we're responding accordingly with each year that passes in terms of products that we're launching to the marketplace.
And are you selling most of your products through garden centres or through trade merchants, for builders merchants?
There is no easy answer to that. We have a sister brand that's at the show today, Borderstone, which is part of the Bradstone Aggregate Industries business. So yes, we sell a huge amount through garden centres and a big amount through builders merchants. So every market and every sector is of equal importance to us.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that just for a moment, because it's not necessarily the same sort of area, but B&Q have just announced last week that their best-selling colour is no longer magnolia, as it has been for the last 25 years, but is now red. You know, it's not even sort of pinkish magnolia, but it's red, which says that that's quite a big sea change, actually, in terms of taste and in terms of opinion. One of the reasons behind that was felt to be that people were staying in their homes longer and therefore expressing themselves a little more, rather than painting the traditional magnolia, because in 2 years' time you might be moving house. And potentially that has implications for our garden market as well, that people are being a little bit more expressive, or maybe a lot more expressive, depending on your opinions on red, about what's going on in their garden, and maybe relates back to what I started off with about this kind of quality of the materials that you might want to use in your gardens, and about how they may be changing from something that might be just a lawn and a bit of paving because you're moving on to another house.
I would very much echo that sentiment. Is that what we find when we introduce new products, where we work pretty close alongside designers, that whether it's shape or colour, if we just place a product in a brochure and then stand back and see what happens for a season, the trends can be very unpredictable. But if we invest heavily in retail and builders merchant displays, so that product has got a prominent position, our sales are very much advanced. And it's just touching on the subject that Andrew made earlier, is that people don't have really good imaginations, and you have to put solutions and products in front of them, and different palettes of product to whet their appetite of that imagination, to help and aid those sales of those new types of products and designs.
I'd like to ask Mark a question. Obviously, we read in the press about concreting over gardens and permeable landscapes, and soft landscape is better for the environment. Have you seen an impact on your sales by people getting away from hard, traditional paving, concrete?
I think in a word, the answer is no. As an industry, there's lots and lots of initiatives to neutralise that effect, and then taking that down another macro layer in terms of aggregate industries. We work very, very joint across all the businesses in the UK and across the world that are a wholesome brand. For example, we have a few concrete manufacturing plants down in the south, and we actually bring aggregates from an island up in Scotland called Glensander, and we use water and our own fleet of barges to bring material down into the south, and that is to lessen that carbon impact. So we're constantly working on new technologies and further investing in existing ones that we've got that are successful to very much utilise that. We have a section on our website which celebrates the achievements that we're making on an ongoing basis.
Do you think it's customer driven? I mean, it's interesting. We're now seeing, I think I'm on the 4th specification where it's design led, where clients have actually said they want an environmentally responsible garden. So zero use of concrete, mortars, minimal mortars, and things that I would traditionally wouldn't do. Things like spot bedding. How can you bed paving when you're trying to do minimal mortar beds? So, the way that we did things, say, 10, 15 years ago is certainly changing. And, I mean, it's not a flow, but it's a drip, certainly, that we're starting to see environmentally demanding clients saying, this is the way I want.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure who's driving that agenda, in truth. We're working as we speak on some new installation technologies. If we can perfect it, and we're hoping we can this year, we'll see us revolutionise the way that paving is actually installed. But it's it's an agenda that's there that we're constantly, all as an industry, all the concrete suppliers are working to try and reduce and minimise the carbon effect. But I'm not quite sure who's driving agendas in terms of that tight specification. And also, I think it'd be interesting to see the results you get with that tight a brief.
I'm certainly getting that from clients that they, quite early on in the briefing and in the discussion stage, that they're asking more about the environmental issues around their gardens. Landfill would be one of them, and obviously that has a sort of financial implication for them. But potentially from a garden design point of view, it might impact on how we consider how much we might change levels, landform, what we do with existing materials on site, whether that might be reused alongside importation of new material and so on. Sorry, Francesca, I saw that you had the mic. You want to ask a question?
Yeah. I think what the industry needs is a TV programme which features gardens probably between a 50 to 150 grand budget. Quality programs, not a makeover, not a quick makeover, but really well designed, really well implemented gardens that's going to generate the interest. Because
Absolutely.
I think what happened
Okay.
about 10 years ago was when Dermot Gavin did his programme, everyone would go into work the next day and would be talking about that garden. Everyone wanted their garden designed.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we've got Gardener's World, which is very good for gardeners. There are various sort of cheap, low-budget makeover programmes, and they're probably aiming towards people who don't have an awful lot of money to spend on their gardens, but that sort of 50 to 150,000 pound bracket, and there's lots of people out there in that bracket that, as you say, don't know who to go to, don't know about the Society of Garden Designers.
Exactly.
So I think you two, with your contacts, you must get onto the BBC or Channel 4, whoever it is, because I think there's real demand for that and there's real interest. There's lots of interest in really good design, and people like to see that. And that sort of TV coverage, a bit like what's the Channel 4 grand designed, the houses.
I think
There's a real market and want for that.
I think given the fact that in that European study, I think 45% of our leisure time is watching television, then first of all, that would make sense. I think I have to say that virtually every television programme about gardens, garden design and gardening is shite, and always has been. And even the Dermot Gavin programmes were questionable in terms of value. I always call them a double-edged sword. And still the television programs are sort of churning out low-cost, low-budget, sort of makeover-y kind of things, or else just kind of wasted opportunities to actually discuss and analyse gardens and give useful information to people. No television companies seem to be interested in that. I think Mark and I would leap on it if ever that kind of came about, really.
I'm sure there must be some quite big companies that are here today that would be, go with you to sort of
send them in.
Back that need, because, the garden centres would benefit, the landscapers would benefit, the designers would benefit, and that's what it needs.
It's a win-win situation, but I think you'd have to talk to the broadcasters to see whether they'd go along with that.
I definitely agree with you.
I'd like to come in there, if I may, and just say that there's 3 different trends of landscaping or aspects of landscaping. You've got your Chelsea landscapes, which is what you're very good at, Mark. There's makeovers, and there's also the bottom end, which I call small works or budget gardening. What you've got to look at is 80% of the business, and our business, my business anyway, is in that middle bracket. And what Groundforce done, for the industry was absolutely fantastic. It got everybody on a buzz. Yes, I agree with you, it didn't last that long, but it pleased 80% of the people which are out there, and they've done it. And there's always going to be room for Rolls Royces, but look at your biggest trends, they're always through the middle. That's what I think that you've got to aim for, is get the majority of interest, but there's always a market to upmarket your landscaping for the ones that want to spend 100k, because I haven't come across too many in my area.
Leslie.
Thank you. I'm going to resist the temptation to get cross about saying that all gardening programmes
except yours, of course.
Thank you. But we only go out in Scotland. And I do have news for you. The BBC is very underfunded at the moment, and we keep on getting cutbacks. No, I want to ask something else. That is, as a garden centre manager, we are noticing a steady decline in the interest in water gardening and water gardening artefacts. Do you think that's a trend? I mean, was it the Charlie Dimmock effect, that there was water in every garden? Are you finding your clients do want water? Because we are certainly finding it's really out of fashion.
I would say that virtually all of my clients ask for water in their garden in some way. So I would say no, I don't see any sign of that. What I do know is that there are some designers who've kind of mentioned anecdotally that they've just stopped specifying water, partly because it remains the single element that over a long term proves least sustainable. That people, in other words, have more problems with their water features. I don't know whether that's to do with the design of those water features, the ongoing maintenance of those water features. I talk to my clients about the fact that they are, if they're planted features, they are like a sort of super-fed border, really, that the planting is going to kind of romp away if you're not careful. The idea that you can have something like that and then not really take any notice of it for the next 5 years is potentially where some of these problems arise, really. I think, again, it comes to where that advice maybe comes from, and television is one of those areas of advice. Maybe also Gardener's Question Time, which has just cancelled its nationwide tour, maybe needs to take note of this as well. But potentially, even though it's maybe a smaller scale affair, the idea of local garden centres being places where people can access advice, whether it's from local designers, local contractors, local specialists. I don't see that kind of advice on offer in too many places. That might help, I don't know. Well, that went down like a lead balloon, didn't it?
Do you want me to come back to
That's
you?
your fault, Leslie.
No, because I know what's being said generally about garden centres as well, but then we're sitting here and have you been to our garden centre? Yeah, 'cause we have 20 demonstration gardens, 6 small gardens that we change annually, over 40 designer collections which we give away to people with planting ideas, and we man an information desk the entire time, which is in the shop.
I think you should be here
Dusty
doing a
No, I shouldn't,
seminar.
Andrew, I'm very
actually.
happy on the back row. But some people are working very hard at giving inspiration, and it's just that we're dotted about the place.
I think
I absolutely acknowledge that.
That's really good, but certainly where we are, we don't have that. And I see builders merchants, and obviously you supply builders merchants. A lot of the show gardens in builders merchants are not maintained, really badly put together, and they look good for about a month, and then really they have a negative effect on actually inspiring people. So it's good that you say you change them, which is it's a big cost. But certainly I think you're not the norm, certainly, because certainly down us, I don't know a really good place to go for design inspiration. Not unless you've got places like Capel Manor, which hold the National Garden Collection, and that's about the closest one to us.
Well, we're in Surrey, in the Thames Valley, we're surrounded by garden centres, none of whom I've had any dealings with at all as a designer in their midst, really. And we were talking about this on the way up. Neither has Mark as a landscape contractor in their midst. And maybe it's up to us to sort of put out the hand of friendship. I don't know. But it seems to me that there's this huge gap there in terms of information giving and advice and support, or even just discussions like this that would help to generate support information for the future. One of the things that I had on my list was about sort of sustainable planting, and there's been a huge amount of research into that area. And going to Chelsea as a judge and as a visitor, and Hampton Court, I see it in the show gardens. And I go to my garden centre and I don't see any of it. And so again, there seems to be this kind of distance between stuff that's potentially on designers' lips as trendsetters, but no trend sort of following that. So where do people go for advice? We're in a situation where our climate is changing. Where do people go for advice? Now, obviously, the RHS is there as a huge advice giver guy. But, you know, on a more local level, we don't all live 5 miles from Wisley, as I do. We might say, well, maybe our garden centre has that information, but maybe they don't. I don't know. Sorry, there's a person over there with his hand up.
Just to say that I'm Dave Everett. I run a landscape design construction business locally. Just to say, I think one of the major problems, just going back to your idea of having these gardens at £100,000 and £150,000, what have you, the major thing that I have found, having worked with garden centres, worked in colleges, etc., is the fact that people do not understand the basics of design. once you explain to people why a statue is there or an urn is there, and you give them a reason why it's there, they say, right, fine, yeah, I understand that. If you don't explain to people, you go back sometime later and discover this statue is now somewhere in the corner because they didn't realise it was a focal point. If you get people to understand why and how the design works, I think that gives people a much better idea of why they're buying the product they're buying, etc. If on a program we had something that explained the design elements of it, I think you'd get a much better response.
Yeah, I agree totally,
Yeah,
and I would also say that it's about time that we started to own up about how much everything costs, actually, design included, and Ground Force, for one example already mentioned, was absolutely completely useless in giving people totally the wrong idea as to how much any of that work cost. And when I was just putting some notes together for today, there was a guy who tweeted and was proud of the fact that he'd just done a garden makeover for a client for less than £2,000. Now, £2,000 to some people might seem like, quite a lot of money, but it is not enough money to create a new garden design.
It
just isn't. And from the point of view of sustaining a garden design business, it's madness. But nobody's willing to put their head above the parapet and say that. But it has to be said, whether you like it or not, really.
Hi there. I'm a landscape designer and landscaper as well. The problem I'm finding with garden centres and nurseries, the nurseries are now open their doors to the public on a Saturday and a Sunday, and the landscaper's markup on his plants supplying to the client has just been completely out the window.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of landscapers out there who send their clients deliberately down to the nurseries because they haven't got a clue about their plant either. So these guys should just be bombed out the industry completely.
Yeah.
It's killing everybody, basically.
Yeah, I totally get that. That's a big thing. Certainly landscapers are seen to be cut out of the supply chain as a massive issue, that is. I also think one of the biggest issues faces our industry, and certainly my side, isn't, as some people would think, training on paving and walling and brickwork. It's pure horticulture, basic horticulture. There's a complete lack of basic horticulture, I think, right across the board, both from garden design, certainly landscape architects, but certainly contractors, landscape contractors like ourselves, scant design, scant knowledge.
And also the builders merchants are supplying the stuff to us. The clients could go down to these builders merchants and get them for the same price. Yeah. It's unbelievable. We didn't get enough discount off this stuff to pass on to the client, and the client thinks you're ripping them off.
I think certainly what I was going to bring up is one of the challenges. I think the future of garden design. We've had 2 severe winters over for the last 2 years, and we're seeing pots that were frost-proof falling apart. We're seeing paving that maybe limestones and things that you could get away with in central London falling apart. Thousands and thousands of pounds of damage. Plants that you could get away with for years you couldn't get, and vast. It's wiped out most of the phormiums, thank God. And cordylines and lots of semi stuff, but actually, is garden design going back? This is one for Andrew. Is garden design going back to, proven Yorkstones, proven planting?
Well, one swallow doesn't make a summer, but you'd have to say,
2.
okay, 2 years worth
2 severe ones, Andrew.
Severe winters. You have to say, okay. I was actually talking about Italian cypress the other day, and I'd used incense cedar, and the client was asking why it wasn't Italian cypress, and I'm still not convinced about the long-term use of Italian cypress, even in the soft underbelly of the south, really. And so it's that sense of where your own borders are, really, where you sort of say, well, yes, okay, we could spend loads of money on these specimens, but they may not be here in 2 years' time, given the winters that we've just had. On the other hand, we could suddenly have 5 years of mild winter again. But I think, what may be the 2 winters that have just gone have kind of reminded us of is the way the natural world works, and that we're kind of messing about with it and trying to promote these products that are not necessarily right for us.
But you as a garden designer with a client who wants a Mediterranean feel, what do you do? do you then say, look, I'll do it, but there's a chance that you're going to get another winter and your investment's gone?
I look at planting that will give that Mediterranean quality, that has got good hardiness, that is reliable, but will still give a sense of that without it being an absolute accurate reincarnation, really. But again, it's about informing the client. It's about making sure, educating that they're aware of what they're doing. I mean, a lot of clients, from my point of view, I can't remember who I was talking about this to the other day, especially the top-end clients are not gardeners. They're not garden interested even. They have probably bought this fab house with a potentially fab garden, but it's the house that they bought. The garden is something that maybe a year on they kind of go, oh yeah, we've got to do something about the garden. And I did a talk at Palmstead last year, which was also about the future of garden design. And we had a client with 5 acres of garden who said, I don't want it to be a garden. So we want a couple of borders that we can maintain and garden. But the rest of the 5 acres, what are you going to come up with? And so my big question to my students regularly is, what is a 5-acre low-maintenance garden sort of thing? And what we came up with was a designed landscape. It's actually this approach to creating something that feels and looks designed, but which actually uses just the native material of that area. Now, for many people who are keen gardeners, brought up on this sort of horticultural sort of last 150 years of get anything from anywhere around the world, that isn't a garden. But actually, in terms of future trends, maybe it is. And maybe we go back to actually using quite a limited palette of materials in just a very clever and innovative way. Why not? Was that the right answer?
Yeah.
Could I just change the subject a little bit and go on to future materials that we might be using? And could I ask Mark Wood, what's the next thing to take over from Indian sandstone? For one, is there something that we're going to be able to manufacture in this country to be able to compete with Indian sandstone?
It's a very difficult question to answer in a short period of time. I think that we are seeing trends where there has been Indian sandstone in the UK market of various different degrees of quality and price, and I think both Mark and Andrew has alluded to that of being a wake-up call in terms of is the balance between price and quality, and what happens when the quality is not quite up to UK standards, even though it's sold in the UK. So I think that there are some very good stones still in the UK that will be available for a long time to come, but there is this balance between price, and certainly from our business, we'd much prefer to sell English source stones, but the price is very different, and that's about going back to design and the effects and the longevity of it. And I think that one of the interesting things, and I think was asked a question earlier on in terms of what we're seeing, we are seeing a requirement, and it's design driven, to go back to concrete products, but in different shapes, sizes, and colours, which we look forward to being of service to the industry.
And can you guarantee those not to fade in colour? Is there something that can be done about that?
There's technologies improving as time progresses. Lots of the pigments are now have got chemical balances in them for UV. So hopefully, over a period of time, you will see the longevity of colour. But at the end of the day, it is a concrete product. Interesting, and I don't know from a design perspective what Andrew's take on it is that up to 2 years ago we were seeing people and trends of if they've had a new patio done, that we were seeing people change every 5 years. And I'm not quite sure where we'll go with what a consumer's requirement. Clearly, we've heard some examples today of having 40 minutes a week in a garden, and the people get, if they can increase on that period of time that they can spend in a garden, are they changing their requirements on a rolling, ongoing basis? Are they looking for something that's really durable, long-standing, and there forever?
I'd be horrified if my clients changed my gardens after 5 years, I think. I think, interestingly, Mark and I worked together on a garden in 2001 which used poured concrete and which used natural pigments and colour washes using natural pigments. And that's still exactly the same colour that we sort of laid down then. And I went off to Ireland to do a talk and to present this garden, and was barracked by people in the audience for using concrete and for its carbon footprint, even then. And I actually have to admit that took me by surprise at the time. And I just thought, well, okay, you know, what have I done here? Okay, I've used this material that's got this enormous footprint. But then last year at the London College, we were doing a Reader's Day with Gardens Illustrated, and we were looking at sustainable issues. And one of the elements in deciding on how sustainable a product is its longevity. And so I said, okay, then this concrete garden of mine, which will still be there in 100 years' time, how does that work in terms of sustainability? And it got full marks. So I guess it depends on how you actually look at your material and what you want that material to do. So yes, if you're going to dig that terrace up, and it was a big terrace, every 5 or 10 years, then obviously that has a big sustainable issue attached to it. If it's still there in 100 years' time and people are still using it, which is what it was designed to be, then it starts to gain brownie points.
Could I also ask another question? What does the panel think of using artificial grass that you've got your feet on at the moment and being allowed into Chelsea and Hampton Court shows?
Well, I think it's got its place. I really do. We do a lot of work in central London, and this notion of trying to establish lawns in shady places is a complete utter waste of time. I think if it's designed, and I use the word design because I think it can look absolutely hideous, but if it's actually designed as a space, I think it's got its place, certainly. I don't think it's right for every aspect. I personally wouldn't want it as an alternative lawn, but I can see why people would want it. No, I think I'm comfortable with it, actually.
Well, I would say the same, really. I mean, as a designer, you're looking at the right product for the right location. And so, you know, potentially, if a client says to me, okay, we want this kind of soft surface for our children to play on, and it's shady in this garden, and what do we do? Then potentially it's a great material. Or if they said, look, we just don't want to spend any time outside, you hoover it just like you might hoover your carpet, and it's a great material. Do I want to see it in every show garden that I assess and judge? No, not really. I don't have a problem of seeing it, as Mark says, used in the right way. But the RHS is running horticultural shows. It's not running shows about artificial grass and artificial material. It's all right, I'm in Birmingham. I can say grass like a true northerner, really, instead of grass. Do you have any feelings about artificial grass? It's not a new product in your repertoire.
No, not yet.
Can have concrete grass instead.
Yeah, maybe.
Dougal.
We've got 5 minutes if anybody's got a burning question that they want answering.
And then we're running off.
As chairman of RHS Shows, could I say that we actually encourage artificial grass in places where real grass wouldn't grow?
That's right.
And it really has a place. I mean, we've had pink grass in some of our shows, and it's delightful.
At Birmingham, in fact.
At Birmingham. Could I exhort the APL to actually get this dialogue actually working with garden centres? Because that's where landscapers should be found by customers. And we should be seen to be part of the same happy family, giving people enjoyment in their gardens. And it doesn't need to be competitive, but you need to be more proactive, because garden centres resist giving away any margin or sales.
Absolutely. And why would they?
Well, I don't think we would, but we always have a nasty competitive suspicion, and it needs nice landscapers to hold our hands and to show us the benefits of working as a team.
I would agree with that, and I think certainly at the small end of APL, entry-level contractors, retailers, garden centres are a valuable source of leads, a valuable source. I know Norman supports leads from garden centres on that smaller end entry level. So I definitely agree that APL and also Barley as well should be a lot more proactive in getting more work generated from retail.
Absolutely.
Mark, could I just come in there and say about the connection with landscapers and garden centres? There was an incentive introduced, I think, about 3-4 years ago with Wyvale Garden Centres and the HTA. We're actually now in 12 garden centres throughout the south. These places has taken at least 2 years for it to have any effect, and it's cost an awful lot of money. But all I can say now is that we've built the relationship with the garden centre owners, managers, and it's now started to pay high dividends for us.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of inquiries, but it is quite an expensive way to market, though.
And would you say, Norman, that if you were a retailer and not a landscaper, and they're completely different animals, they're completely different businesses, would you say retail need a professional landscaper as opposed to garden centres who then bolt on a landscape division who know nothing about that side, and like in the case of the one in Surrey, folded because of too much grief, basically, and moving away from the core business?
I think with Wyvale, as they were known then, they were looking for it for extra revenue, and the stipulation was that we had to buy our materials from them, and they would actually give us free space if we'd done that. But the actual materials that they stocked is something that we wouldn't use in our gardens, so we finished up paying, because they're for the DIY people, not for professional landscapers. And
what's the difference? What's the difference?
Well, the price to start off with is the one thing, and also the sizes for people to be able to take away paving stones. They didn't want to go up above 450s, whereas, as you know, in our trade, we're using much bigger sizes and a mixture. As I said, it's handling those materials out of a garden centre, which is a big problem. You need forklifts, and garden centres don't mix very well. And then you need high-ab lorries to unload it at the other end. So it's quite a thing, to do. But with the Wyvales and these connections that we have with the 12 garden centres, we actually pay them rent for a storyboard. So they're getting it that way, their revenue, and they're quite happy, and we're also happy as well.
Okay. Has anybody got any burning, Francesca?
The RHS shows, which Chelsea, for example, gets about 15 or so hours coverage from the TV, would there be a place at any of these shows to have a category, perhaps that isn't judged on a horticultural basis, where there can be, sort of going back to what the guy was saying about budgets, be a 20 grand garden category or a 50 grand garden category? Because the Chelsea gardens, which can cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, which aren't particularly obtainable, if there was a sector like that, then I think, again, it would increase the interest and the awareness in design, and I think would perhaps be a boost to the garden centres, the designers and the contractors. So just wonder if that could somehow fit with the RHS, because there's such a huge footfall, and perhaps people want to take away something that they can really have in their own gardens.
Well, I know Andrew's obviously got thoughts on that. I mean, obviously everybody looks at the RHS as it's the answer for everything, and it's not. I mean, I think that it's a horticulture charity. I think Chelsea, for me personally, I wouldn't want to see Chelsea watered down. People say it's over glamorous. That is, it's adding. Horticulture now in this country is way bigger than agriculture, and Chelsea Flower Show is world class, and we are world class at growing, design and construction, and I would not want to see Chelsea watered down. It's a haute couture, it brings a lot of revenue in, and whether it's there for a week, it's totally international. And I think the RHS are doing things at Hampton Court. They're giving now we've got gardens with no plants in, so people who kind of bang about the RHS should be doing this, should be doing that, but they are doing it. And they are giving, bursaries, £6,000 for conceptualism gardens, and all the shows have got different signatures. And I've been around long enough to know that things have moved an awful long way. But I wouldn't want Chelsea to be curtailed by budgets, because I think that would be wrong for the wider picture. But I think certainly Birmingham, Malvern, Tatton Park and Hampton Court, absolutely, they are the places that, I think I'm right in saying I think the RHS Dougal at Chelsea this year are launching a different category of garden, an urban, a small bit, so you can actually get micro take-home bits. So, it's constantly reevaluating itself, and I don't think it's a moving targets, but these big gardens, generate an awful lot of revenue for the bigger picture.
Mark, could I come in? This is exactly the sort of garden that you were asking for programmes to feature. The £100,000 garden or the £700,000 garden. But I have to say, on exit surveys, our visitors at Chelsea actually say they get more inspiration from the smaller gardens. It might be 6,000 to 20,000. So we have that category even at Chelsea. They see the big ones, but it doesn't actually inspire them to go and try and do that in their own garden. But it does give gardening 11 to 12 hours of high-profile television because of these exotic big show gardens.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that I would endorse what Mark's just said about Chelsea. I wouldn't like to see Chelsea lose that sort of status in a way. But each of the shows have educational elements, and that certainly within the educational elements or the show features, it would be entirely possible to introduce this concept of relating the designs that you see to some kind of financial breakdown. But again, I think this is not something that people should kind of fudge and brush under the carpet. That I think you would probably agree as a fellow garden designer that one of the biggest battles that one has as a designer presenting information to clients in any of the categories that I mentioned earlier on, from lowest to highest, the big question is, why does this cost so much? And when you actually get to the stage where you can break it down and say these materials are X, this planting is Y, this is the labor that it takes to do this, blah, 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 that people then can understand. I mean, I think one of the greatest issues for me, hopefully people can hear me over the top of that, is that people only really genuinely understand the value of their gardens once they're finished. And for the garden designer, the battle is to get to that stage with the client still feeling positive about what they're spending on their garden. And nobody, television especially that we mentioned before, is fighting that battle. They're actually fighting against us, which is a big problem for the future anyway.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, we've kind of run out of time. We're over time, actually. So just like to thank you for your tolerance and patience. I hope you found it interesting kind of discussion. And thanks for your participation as well. So we're around for a while if you need us. Thank you.